Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Allah has sent prophets throughout the times, throughout the history of humanity, to different peoples. These prophets brought truth. After they came, and after their tenure was up and they returned to eternity, men who were not of the same substance as they were began to teach and make religions out of what the prophets had brought. An interesting phenomenon that I've noticed in this world is that many people believe that if they don't understand something, it doesn't exist. If they don't know something, it can't be. And if they can't do it, it can't be done. Especially in spiritual communities and in spiritual worlds. Arrogance is a major tool of Satan in this world. And arrogance in a spiritual sense is much easier than, say, arrogance in an engineering sense. If someone can make something, create something, invent something, and you can't, you sort of have to acknowledge that you can't because you can't do this. But in the spiritual sense, people think they can do anything because it's inside, it's not outside, it's not externalized. So arrogance can go crazy in the spiritual sense, and people can say they can do almost anything. Well, if you read the works of the prophets, which are holy books, if you are taught by someone who has actually climbed the spiritual ladder and has ascended into the realms of higher and higher consciousness, then you're getting the real deal. But if you're listening to somebody who hasn't ascended and who hasn't reached the higher levels of consciousness, you're getting less than that. And in getting less than that, the truth is somehow lacking. And how does this happen? It happens because the world sneaks in to the teachings of people who haven't reached higher consciousness. All of a sudden, political things become important. All of a sudden, status becomes important. All of a sudden, wealth becomes important. Because this is what these people understand, and they can only give you what they have. A cobra can only give you venom. If you're expecting something else, you're not going to get it. So we have had religious leaders over time who've done horrible things, who've desecrated the name of truth and desecrated the name of religion for power and for supposed superiority. A simple example is the Inquisition that occurred in Spain. All of a sudden, in order to purify or to imagine that they were purifying their faith, they had to commit genocide on the other faiths that existed within their community. Now, they didn't kill everybody, they chased them out, but the point is, they wanted to purify their faith. And this kind of thinking is not uncommon in the religious world. And that's why Europe suffered from religious wars for hundreds of years. That's why today you have the Catholic and Protestant divisions within Ireland and Scotland. I remember I was in Glasgow and I had to take a cab to get to Edinburgh, which is where I was going to a conference. And we were talking to the cab driver, and he was talking about all of this immigration that was happening into Glasgow from other European countries, especially Poland, which is Catholic. And he was explaining to me how Catholicism is a different religion than the Christianity they practice. He didn't consider it Christianity. He considered it something entirely different. Most religions preach that they are somehow superior to every other religion, and that they somehow can do something for you that the other religions can't. That by entering into their community, you have chosen the chosen community. In other words, you can choose to be chosen by the appropriate conversion process. One of the most important things that I remember from my teacher was, upon being asked the question, is there a chosen people? His response was, yes, there is. The ones who choose God, God chooses them. This is such an important understanding that it has to be reiterated over and over and explained over and over, that your spiritual succession, your spiritual success, your spiritual growth is not based on whether you cut your hair or shave your hair. It's not based on the clothes that you wear. It's not based on external visible things. It's based on an internal change that occurs that separates you from the phenomenal world. Spirituality is different than the phenomenal world. The elemental existence that we all live in, the elemental understandings that we all have, the elemental visions that we're all involved in, bring us to certain conclusions and make us act in certain ways. Desire, for instance, is usually attached to that which is elemental. And that's what causes so many problems in the world. There's only a limited amount of elemental goods. Real estate, for instance, is elemental. And if two different people want the same real estate, what happens? It becomes problematic. And if two different countries want the same real estate, it becomes a problem for all the people in each of the countries. And that's how wars start. They come through disagreements needs, desires over things elemental. If you are turning towards the spiritual, you are leaving the confines of the phenomenal world. You are leaving the confines of the elemental world, and all of a sudden your thinking patterns become different. Your thinking patterns no longer rely on your sensual perceptions. Your thinking patterns are no longer formed by how you see things with these eyes, how you smell things, how you hear things. You go somewhere else. You go somewhere where these phenomenal things don't exist in the way they exist in this world. For instance, Rahman and Rahim are real things. You can feel them when you encounter them, but you don't see them with your sense perception. You don't feel them with your sense perception. So, as we deal with the world, as we deal with teachers in the world, as we deal with holy people in the world, one of the ways that you can recognize their veracity, their truth, their consciousness is by what is it that they deal with? What is it that they preach? Do they preach the phenomenal world? And is everything they tell you about within the phenomenal world? Or do they take you beyond the phenomenal world into that which is non-elemental, yet which exists eternally, which exists forever? Are they tied up in the phenomenal problems that they sometimes create themselves and say you must rectify? Or do they go beyond that into the understandings that have to do with consciousness and with understanding, as portrayed within Islam and Sufism, of the gracious qualities of Allah, the gracious names of Allah? And do those become the focus of the teaching and the focus of the understanding? For some, and this is in all religions, they involve you in some sort of repetitive external actions. And depending on what group you're in, you're judged by your external repetitive actions. And either you do them or you don't. And if you do them, you're accepted and you have committed yourself to the appropriate nature of who you should be. And if you don't do them, you're not. However, since you can't see inside of other people and you can't see their hearts, you can't truly understand their nature. The Prophet, in his final discourse to his community, said, "Beware the impostors." So a lot of people have understood that to fit in to their community, they have to do certain kinds of things. They have to act externally in a certain kind of way. And they learn how to do this. They learn how to get along. We have a phrase in English called a con man. A con man is someone who pulls the wool over your eyes and makes you believe in something that's not real. Well, what is a con man? Con stands for confidence. It's somebody who gives you confidence in his sincerity, confidence in his reality, confidence in the fact that he's telling you the truth. All the time, he knows that he isn't. The Quran talks about these people and calls them hypocrites. And it says that one of the great sins is this kind of hypocrisy. Well, we have to learn to be the same on the inside as on the outside. We have to learn to display our truth and our reality externally, not have filters between our truth and what's available externally. And if we can't remove these filters, we're living a lie. If we have to filter our thoughts and filter our intentions so that they can be acceptable within the group that we're within, we're living a lie. And somehow we have to give up living a lie. Now, what has happened in many religions is they have institutionalized these lies in order to avoid hypocrisy, and these lies have become the basis of the religion. For instance, it is okay to do away with people who don't agree with us in the way that we approach the truth. People who don't see things the way we see them have no merit. God has somehow created those with merit and those without merit. And the ones without merit are without use. And we can hate them, and we can denigrate them, and we can do whatever we want to them. As if God created a landscape of people that are all of a different stature. Something like the caste system in India. Everybody fits into their place and has to maintain their place. And if God wanted them to be in a different place, he'd have had them born into a different family. And then they institutionalized reincarnation to say, well, you'll have an opportunity for a different family if you live correctly within the caste that you were born in. Now, that's not to say that reincarnation doesn't exist. That's just to say this is an interpretation of reincarnation. If you're fortunate enough to find a true teacher, one who has overcome all of the phenomenal desires that exist within this world and is capable of moving in the higher levels of consciousness without being affected by the phenomenal world and the praise and blame that comes from it and the needs and desires that come from it. If you're lucky enough to have such a teacher, what you'll see is that they are different than the people that you ordinarily run into. They're different because they don't react to this world in the same way that the people who haven't transcended the world react. So, if you're fortunate and you meet such a teacher, then you see the highest level of what this transcendence can be like. And then the question is, where are we on this ladder of transcendence? How far are we willing to go? And what are we willing to make part of our life in order to become transcendent? Can we hold on to the thoughts that we had as teenagers and still be transcendent? Can we hold on to the thoughts we had as a 30-year-old and still be transcendent? Can we hold on to the thoughts that we have today and still be transcendent? So we need to be constantly comparing ourselves to those who are transcendent. And we need to be honest enough to see the differences. And as we learn the differences, we need to reshape ourselves as to what our intention is. Now, if our intention is to fulfill the desires that we have within this phenomenal world, no change is going to occur. We may talk a good game about transcendence, but we're not really interested in it. We have to find our level. We have to find what we can do, and then we have to slowly alter what we can do. We have to, if we begin to exercise, you can't run a marathon your first day. Maybe you can walk for 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 15 minutes, and the next day you can add 3 minutes to that, and the next day you can add 5 more minutes to that. And slowly you build up to where your stamina can take you further down the road. Now, when you're dealing with ascetics, which is what many of these holy men were, whose level of desire as to this phenomenal world is almost non-existent, there's a big gap between our desire-filled world and this ascetics world, this true ascetic. So we have to learn patience. And patience is one of the names of God. If we don't have patience, we'll stop wherever we are and we'll say, this is impossible. And we won't go any further. But it's not impossible. It just takes time. And it takes perseverance. And it takes discipline. And it takes certitude. And it takes one-pointedness. And it takes concentration. And all of these things have to be developed. And they take time to develop. And we know what we're good at, and we know what we're not good at. And we have to begin to become an honest watcher of ourselves, one who can truly see where we're going and how we got where we are. And we have to look very closely at our intentions and the nature of our intentions. Now, we've all read, seen on TV, front page of newspapers, about all of the scandals within the Catholic Church. Most of them having to do with sexual indiscretions. Now, how does it happen that a man becomes a priest and is hiding sexual indiscretions his entire life? Beware the impostors. They're everywhere. And they do what they need to do in order to get what they truly want. So people can create a fantasy for themselves and yet backslide into depravity at a moment's notice. Or some of them, their entire life may be focused on that depravity, and they've created this mask, this visage of who they are, and there's no truth to it at all. We have to be very careful about our integrity. We have to be very careful about our truth. We have to create appropriate intentions and follow through on them. We have to live in a world that is without lies and without active misleading, or we become con men. And the first person that we con is ourselves. We begin to believe in our deceptions. And what happens in a spiritual path is that with arrogance, we are able to rationalize everything as okay. But we should also understand that we are not the arbiter of what is okay. And we have to use a different standard than our own. I mean, if you're at the third level of consciousness and you're using third level of consciousness standards to assume sixth level consciousness, there's a lie going on. There's a misconception going on, all brought about by arrogance. So, as our teacher said, we have to become small. And becoming small is doing away with arrogance. We have to surrender. Islam means surrender. Surrender what? Surrender our own personal will to the higher will, to the will of the Creator, to the will of Allah. And in this surrender, we give up our phenomenal desire-based life. Now, the phenomenal desire-based life is the common life in this world. This is what most people live. This is what most people consider existing. Some get to the point where they say to themselves, is this all there is? Some never get to that point. But if you've gotten to that point and said, is this all there is? You have to start looking for something else. And you have to stop doing the same things that you were doing before. And you have to figure out how to do that. Now, in religion, in Islam specifically, the mode of people's interpretation of what they should and shouldn't do descends over time. And that which is less than transcendent becomes acceptable. And then that which is less than transcendent goes even lower and goes even lower. And these things become institutionalized into religion because everybody's doing it and it's too hard to change it, especially since the ones in charge are doing it also. So the Muhayyaddeens come every 100 years or so to reintroduce the truth into the religion and to show people what the descent has been, what the degradation has been, how they have fallen, and to lift them back up. We need to come under the influence of Muhayyaddeens, whether in books or whether in life. We need to find the Muhayyaddeens. We need to understand their explanations and understand that that is what will save us. A true transcendent person to you, the transcendence that he knows, and can show you the transcendence that he knows. And a lot of it is just by their being. a lot of it is by their way that they act, by the things that they do. So we need to decide, how high do we want to transcend? What's the level of asceticism that we're going to come to? And by asceticism, what I basically mean is our attachment to the phenomenal elemental world. What is the control that the phenomenal elemental world has on us, and how can we escape from that? This is the work of a true spiritual path. To escape from the phenomenal elemental world into a spiritual understanding of truth, of reality, of Hak. Bringing Hak into our existence as opposed to making our sensory, illusory perceptions real. And having the courage to continue to travel that path. May Allah give us the insight so that we know that truth. May He give us the strength to go that way, and may He give us the inspiration to constantly move forward. Ameen, ameen. Ya Rabbil Alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.